here. It's our great pleasure to welcome, on behalf of the Center for Indic Studies, Department of Political Science and Indian Student Association, prominent, rising leader and someone who believes in a different type of politics, if there is one. I had this conversation with Dr. A.P., as he's commonly known, for the interview that we had about the program for Center for Indic Studies, and enjoyed tremendously his conversation. He is a person who is beyond success, as I can see. Most of us want to be something professionally somewhere, and he already crossed that long time ago and didn't like it. And so he moved, he was a physician, he got a medical degree, and then he didn't like it. And so he became Indian Administrative Service, so those of you know IAS officers, which is a very prized position in India. And he didn't like that either. I think he knew too close. And I thought really he moved away from, because he meets too many politicians, so he didn't like that. But I think there is a circle of time, as in India people say. So after about 14 years of journey, he is in the middle of politics. You think that maybe this Michael say, but this, so maybe there is a politics head solution to things. So it doesn't have only problems as solutions. So he is somebody who has really given up for his principles, and I think that he inspires a lot of young people, which I think is very, very important. I'm very impressed with that. That there is a group of people who otherwise you wouldn't think that they would be involved, because I think they have given hope on the system. But he is someone who is bringing hope in that sense. And in the process, he is looking at India's future. And so I think he's going to speak today on India's future, promise, and fulfillment. Dr. J.
Friends, I'm delighted to be with you all. I don't intend to inflict a lecture, so don't be alarmed. I really want this to be a conversation, to try and learn some things and share some things. I was wondering, what is it that I'm going to say for this Department of Indic Studies, and obviously a significant number of students of Indian origin here, political science background and others. So then I saw the other slide that Professor Sarfaraz, the talk you're going to have next week of the Jews in India, or Jews of India. It suddenly occurred to me, amazingly, every major religion has found a very warm hospitality in India well before much of the world understood anything about those religions. Jewish people, as the brief slide showed, 2,200 years ago they went to India. The Zoroastrians, the moment Islam occupied them, they all moved to India. The Parsis, as we call them. Christianity, it went to India in the 1st century area. I don't know if you're all aware of that. So Thomas is said to have visited India, the Malabar coast, sometime in 78 AD, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about the exact year. Islam, 622 was Hijrah, the flight from Mecca to Medina by the Prophet and his disciples. Within 90 years, by 712 AD, Islam went to India. Many of you may not be aware. We only think of Muhammad the Brazilian Muhammad. But 712 AD, a young man called Qasim at the age of 17, he conquered sin. And not because of religious reasons, mind you, because of trade reasons. There was a flourishing international trade at the time between the Arabian Gulf and India. But also there was a lot of piracy or piracy on Islam's. And the Caliph of the time, I think Umayyad Caliph of Alexandria, he felt that this local king of Sindh was not able to control the pirates. And therefore at his command, this young man came and conquered Sindh and occupied that. So Islam came to India really within a century after and within 80 years after Fulfilment's death. And of course, Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, they're all indigenous to India. In that sense, it's amazing. It's incredible, actually. There's no land comparable to this. Obviously, it's not in the history. It's not because of any great glory of the nation, but it just happened. A confluence of many circumstances. And the diversity of India is really unmatched. It doesn't require any repetition, except that those of us who are so familiar, we take it for granted. That there are 18 plus languages, each of which has centuries of history, some of them millennia of history. Each has a script, literature, culture, and civilization. It's just amazing. And yet they're living together as one country. In Canada and your northern neighborhood. Every other day there's a threat of secession because the Quebec people speak French and the rest of Canada speaks English, and they can't really find a way of living together much of the time. It's an amazing source of inspiration in some ways. So in many ways, as we all know, 60 years ago, almost exactly 60 years ago, what happened was a remarkable experiment. Just as this great country was the first modern republic, first true democracy with a written constitution, with separation of powers, founded on two principles and liberty, India is obviously the first country which had the courage and faith to adopt universal adult franchise on the day of its promulgation of the Constitution. And given the backdrop that we never had really constitutional democracy or that kind of history, and we had so much of diversity, a vast number of people at that time, probably about 86 to 87% of Indians were illiterate. Even today, 40%, 35% are illiterate. And such a country actually experimented boldly with universal franchise is remarkable. And that we survived to tell the tale. In many ways, obviously, we succeeded. Not too far from here, Myron Weiner, he said in one of his more celebrated works, he postulated 4 principles of a functioning democracy, 4 tests of a functioning democracy. He said political freedoms, competitive elections, winners do not punish losers merely on account of the fact that they lost the election. Don't behead the fellow or jail the fellow or whatever. And the elected government is truly in authority. It's not a coterie or a janta or somebody else, but there's actually a government in power, which is elected by the people. By these 4 yardsticks, India certainly succeeded quite significantly, which itself is a miracle. There were many stories 30, 40 years ago when India would break up, we ran a million mutinies. Tomorrow there's an imminent collapse kind of thing. Even today, of course, there are many apocalyptic visions of India. But the fact that these diversities are managed for centuries and in the modern sense after the republic is founded is actually quite remarkable. And we now are in a unique age. Rapid economic growth, a demographic dividend which is potentially unmatched if we utilize it skillfully, but could also become a nightmare if we don't really harness our strengths. And a situation in which Thomas Friedman's celebrated phrase, the earth is flat. Today, wherever you are in the world, this land more than any other country has given us phenomenal opportunities across the world. Your location doesn't really matter much within reasonable limits, obviously. Technology is not going to be transplanted with such speed and skill that it's absolutely amazing. Even 15 years ago, many of us did not really think it was possible. I remember still when Lok Sabha movement was founded, I wrote a discussion paper. We were not a movement in search of an agenda. We were actually an agenda in search of a movement. So we were clear about what we believed was right and necessary for the country based on analysis, and then we set out to try and see in what manner we could impact these ideas. So I wrote a discussion paper at that time, and then my friends in this country, they wanted copies of that. And I said, all right, I'll mail them. I said, no, that'll take too much time. Send by email. I said, what's this email? I really didn't know, honestly, in 1996 that there's something called email. And then I went to a software technology park locally. A good friend was there, and I asked him to send it. By the time we had some familiarity with computers, well, I never really became proficient in using them. I'm not good at the keyboard. Like many Indians, I have somebody else to type. So But I knew that computers are there, they actually serve the software, they can quickly correct the graph and so on and so forth, you don't have to redo it, everything. That much of awareness was there, no more, exactly. Then I took that floppy, I suppose, in those days, not in a disk. And then this chap put it somewhere and then clicked a button and said, it's gone. I said, where has it gone? Even today, I have a sense of wonder. Where does it go? How does it reach millions of people if we so choose instantly? I don't know how it happens really, except in a vague sense. I can pretend that I know, but what I know is that the consequences of it now. That the earth has actually become flat. I don't think we really come to terms with this idea that today knowledge can be transferred with consummate ease. And you don't have to overprice knowledge. You can learn if you really have enough inclination at near zero cost, which is a phenomenal privilege that no other generation in human history. And India, like many other countries, it's not unique to India, is well placed to grab this opportunity, because your economic disparities do not any longer guarantee certain poor outcomes. You could still transcend those barriers and bring about significant change. It's that excitement, that opportunity, that sense of wonder, I think that should never desert us. Otherwise, we will take it for granted and don't really harness these opportunities. But having said all this, are we really in a position to fulfill our potential? That's really the burden of our concerns. As a society, as people who care for India, and perhaps in a deeper sense care for all mankind. I do not know if there's a God, but there's only way to talk about a rabbi. Indian studies, Christian also a lot to do with spiritualism and best to do these days. I must confess to you, the spirit of full disclosure, that I don't know much about God. I don't know if he exists, or she, for that matter. And there is a general principle of mutual non-interference that I follow in respect of God. Don't bother too much about it. It's the Buddhist philosophy, you know. God is there or not, mankind is there, problems are there, we have to find solutions. And that seems to be a satisfactory approach to me personally. But I do believe that there is sin. I believe there are two great sins. One is unfulfilled potential. If a child, or a society for that matter, is endowed by nature or by God with a certain opportunity and potential, and if that potential is not fulfilled only because society is poorly organized to harness that opportunity, that to me is a sin. It's particularly sinful when it comes to individuals. You know, the child labor, 70–80% of Indian children's future determined by birth, by the circumstances of birth at birth, what Warren Buffett called the accident of the womb, is an absolute disgrace in a modern society. And the second great sin to me is avoidable suffering. You know, death, old age, some people say taxes, these are all unavoidable sufferings. You know, we all have to endure them. But there are many, many sufferings which are totally avoidable. One of them, for instance, is Jonathan Salk. I don't know where he worked, in which part of the United States, the man who discovered the polio vaccine. Well into 50 years after he discovered the vaccine, in India, millions of children were falling prey to poliomyelitis. To give just one instance. To me, there's something utterly unacceptable. That you have the solution at hand, that you have the technology and resources, you don't harness them to actually eliminate poliomyelitis. I could say the same thing today of for instance, rubella, the German measles that pregnant women, when they get infected, the children are born with congenital pneumonitis. The vaccine is available, it's relatively inexpensive, it's not high-tech stuff, and yet hundreds of thousands of children in India are born with congenital pneumonitis attributable to rubella, to give another instance. I could go on and on. I would say these two are the greatest sins: unfulfilled potential and avoidable suffering. The technology exists and the resources exist. The modern world gave us unprecedented